Zine El Abidine Ben Ali of Tunisia is number 20 on our list. Ben Ali was the president of Tunisia from 1987 to 2011. Ben Ali assumed the presidency in a bloodless coup a month after he was appointed the prime minister. He led Tunisia for 23 years before stepping down in January 2011 due to a massive protest demanding his exit. In 2012, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for his role in the murders of protesters in the 2011 revolution that led to his exit from power. Embezzlement, misuse of public funds, suppression of political opponents are some of the many sins of one of Africa's longest-serving dictators. Occupying the number 19 spot is Gnassingbé Eyadéma of Togo. Eyadéma remains one of Africa's longest-serving dictators. Eyadéma became the president of Togo in 1967 after leading a military coup against the incumbent president, a man he helped bring to power in a bloody military coup. He died of a heart attack in 2005, and his son, Faure, was named the president of Togo in a controversial circumstance. Eyadéma is the pioneer of Africa's first military coup d'etat, an act that soon became the political trend in Africa. He organized the presidential election in 1998 and cancelled in the interest of national security when he was losing. He was accused of several cases of human rights abuses. Occupying the number 18 spot is Hastings Kamuzu Banda of Malawi. Banda is one of Africa's greatest dictators who led Malawi from 1961 to 1994. Banda lost effective control of Malawi during his absence from Malawi in 1993 when he was flown to South Africa for an emergency brain surgery. Bakile Muluzi, his former political protege, became president in 1994 after the general elections Banda had earlier postponed was conducted in 1994. His reign left Malawi as one of the world's poorest countries. 1 in 3 children under 5 died of starvation. He regularly tortured and murdered political opponents. Human rights groups estimate that at least 6,000 people were killed, tortured, and jailed without trial under Banda. Occupying the number 17 spot on the log is Gaafar Nimeiry of Sudan. Nimeiry came into power in a 1969 coup that put an end to 5 years of corrupt civilian rule. He was ousted from power in 1985 and went into exile in Egypt until he was allowed to return in 1999. He contested in 2000. He got just 7% of the votes. He died in May 2009 at the age of 79. His indiscriminate borrowing left the Sudanese economy in ruins. The Sudanese currency lost almost 90% of its value against the major international currencies. He imposed Islamic Sharia law in 1989. This led to a 2-decade-long religious war between the Muslim North and the mainly Christian South. Moving on to number 16 on the list, Yahya Jammeh of Gambia. Jammeh took power in a bloodless coup in 1994. He lost the 2016 general elections to Adama Barrow and surprisingly, he conceded defeat, only to reject the result few weeks after. He left Gambia on exile to Equatorial Guinea after sustained pressure by the African Union, ECOWAS, and UN. Strong human rights abuses marked Jammeh's regime. Now to number 15, Idriss Déby. In 1990, Déby and his Patriotic Salvation Movement, an insurgent group backed by Libya and Sudan, sacked the incumbent government and Déby became the president of Chad. Déby has used oil proceeds and funds that could have been used to develop Chad to purchase weapons and strengthen his army. Forbes named Chad the world's most corrupt nation in 2006. Number 14 is Obiang Mbasogo of Equatorial Guinea. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo has been president of Equatorial Guinea since 1979, when he ousted his uncle Francisco Macias Nguema in a bloody military coup and sentenced him to death by firing. President Obiang is one of the oldest and longest-serving dictators in Africa. State-operated radio declared President Obiang the country's god, with all power over men and things, and thereby he can decide to kill without anyone calling him to account and without going to hell. Unlawful killings, government-sanctioned kidnappings, torture of prisoners by security forces, and even accusations of cannibalism assailed President Obiang's regime. Forbes estimates his wealth to be around $600 million. He has used an oil boom to enrich his family at the expense of the citizens of Equatorial Guinea. Number 13 is Jose Eduardo dos Santos. Dos Santos, the father of Africa's richest woman, Isabel dos Santos, is Africa's second longest serving head of state, behind Equatorial Guinea's Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo. He has been in power since 1979, and in 2017 he announced that he would finally step down and end his dictatorship over Angola. Strong allegations of corruption, misuse and diversion of public funds for personal gain, human rights abuses and political oppression. 70% of the population of Angola lives on less than $2 a day, and yet the Dos Santos family have amassed a massive sum of personal wealth with Angola's oil proceeds. Occupying the number 12 position is Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi seized power in a bloodless military coup in 1969. The charismatic leader of Libya and one of the greatest dictators in African history met his end during the Libyan revolution in 2011 after rebels in Sese, his city of birth, killed him. He led oil-rich Libya as an absolute dictator for close to 42 years. He quashed anyone that opposed him and was responsible for the death of thousands of his people. Moving on to number 11, Charles Taylor of Liberia. Charles Taylor, once described as a tyrant of death, was the president of Liberia from August 1997 until 2003, when international pressure forced him to resign and go into exile in Nigeria. He remains one of the most brutal dictators in Africa till date. Charles Taylor is currently serving a 50-year sentence for his involvement in what the judge described as some of the most heinous and brutal crimes recorded in human history. He was found guilty of the following charges: acts of terrorism, unlawful killings, murder, violence to life, health and physical or mental well-being of persons. The first of many is Charles Taylor. Charles's full name is Charles MacArthur Ganke Taylor, and he was the 22nd president of Liberia. Charles ruled for 8 years from 1997 to 2003. Taylor was born on January 28, 1948, in a small town near Monrovia, Liberia. Before he became the president of Liberia, Charles was the leader of a rebel group known as the National Patriotic Front of Liberia. Charles Taylor was accused of being a wartime criminal who committed several atrocities and crimes against humanity. This is due to his involvement in the Sierra Leone Civil War that occurred between 1991 and 2002. Charles Taylor was eventually found guilty at the International Criminal Court of Justice, The Hague, in 2012 for all 11 charges ranging from terror, conscripting of or enlisting children under the age of 15 years into armed forces or groups, or using them to participate actively in hostilities, violence to life, health and physical or mental well-being of persons, in particular cruel treatment, and in May of that year, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He is regarded as one of the worst dictators of Africa of the 21st century. Number 10 is Paul Biya of Cameroon. Paul Biya has been the president of Cameroon since 6 November 1982. He consolidated power in a 1983-1984 power struggle with his predecessor, and he remains a powerhouse in Africa and the president of Cameroon till date. Biya has kept himself in power by organizing sham elections and paying international observers to certify them free of irregularities. The top African leader and dictator, who has been accused of constant human rights abuses, was ranked 19th in Parade magazine's top 20 list of the world's worst dictators. Paul hails from Cameroon and was born in February 13, 1933. Politics was always in Biya's blood, and he has managed to be president for several terms. He has been the president of Cameroon since 6th November 1982. Biya has many critics for his lack of public appearances, but Biya wields his sweeping powers like a tyrant. He rules with his authoritarian fist that lets him essentially push any policies that he deems necessary. Though not the worst of the worst, Biya is one of the best known examples of authoritarianism. He ranked 19th in Parade magazine's top 20 list of the world's worst dictators. Robert Mugabe is number 9 on the list. Robert Gabriel Mugabe was president of Zimbabwe and was one of the oldest dictators in Africa. He has been in power since 1980, when he was Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, before he consolidated his power to become president on 31st December 1987. The economy of Zimbabwe was in ruins, and life expectancy for both male and females was a little above 50 years. Massive hyperinflation has made the local currency of Zimbabwe worthless. The exchange rate of Zimbabwe dollar is 35 quadrillion to US $1. The local currency has been retired and replaced with the US dollar and South African rand, and this has led to the near collapse of the manufacturing industry in Zimbabwe. Uncle Ru is the quintessential hero to tyrants, the modern-day messiah that helped bring freedom to Zimbabweans, only to get himself power drunk. He has been in power since 1980. Robert Gabriel Mugabe is a man who needs no introduction. Mugabe is an odd man when it comes to dictators. He has the illusion of democracy on one hand, while he oppresses the white Zimbabwe people with the other. Robert Mugabe has been viewed as being racist towards white people, targeting white citizens in various ways. To make him even more confusing, a number of Africans consider Mugabe a hero in their eyes. Mugabe has committed many crimes against human rights according to news sources. In Mugabe's words, he has referred to lesbians and gays as being worse than dogs and pigs. Though his worst crime are wielding his authoritarian power to strip white people of their wealth and property, in the international scene, he is regarded by many, especially the white folks, as one of the worst dictators of Africa. Number 8 is General Sani Abacha. Sani Abacha became the head of state of Nigeria in 1993 after he sacked the interim president appointed after the annulment of the 1993 elections. The exact details of the dictator's death in the presidential palace in 1998 remains unclear, but it was met by wide celebration, and soon after, Nigeria returned to a democratic path. General Sani Abacha's regime was characterized by massive looting and human rights abuses, such as the public hanging of political activist Ken Saro-Wiwa and jailing several political opponents. Abacha hails from Nigeria, and though he only retained power for a scant 5 years, he managed to commit a lifetime of crimes in this time period. He declared his government to be above the law, and he essentially did whatever he wanted. Sani Abacha has been described by political pundits as the most brutal dictator of the West African powerhouse. He ruled his nation with impunity. Though unconfirmed, rumors emanating from official circles has it that the senior military officer died in sexual bouts with Indian prostitutes. He will always be remembered for the 1995 killing of the political and environmental activist Ken Saro-Wiwa. He was also responsible for $5 billion in stolen funds. It is believed that his family still holds a significant amount of these ill-gotten gains. General Sani Abacha is one of the worst dictators of Africa. Number 7 is Seko Toure of Guinea. Ahmed Seko Toure was elected as the president of Guinea in 1958, a position he held until his death in 1984. Toure, like many other dictators in Africa, survived several assassination attempts and coups while he was in power. He died of heart failure in 1984. Toure banned all opposition parties and declared his party the only legal party in the country. Toure ruled Guinea as a ruthless dictator with no tolerance for opposition. He was accused of several cases of human rights abuse and extrajudicial killings. Seko Toure was only to be president of Guinea for 4 years. He managed to rule it for 3 decades from 1958 to 1984. He declared Guinea a one-party state. Toure was another typical case of someone that was initially seen as the Guinean messiah, but later became a pain to his people. Toure, who was one-time leader of the Pan-Africanist movement, consistently spoke out against colonial powers. He befriended African-American activists that included the likes of Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, to whom he offered asylum. Several Guineans fled the country to avoid death camps that were enacted under his watch. Many of his political opponents were executed in these camps. Number 6 is Francisco Macias Nguema, also of Equatorial Guinea. Nguema was the first president of Equatorial Guinea. He ruled Equatorial Guinea before his nephew in 1979 overthrew him and sentenced him to death by firing squad for genocide and other crimes he committed. He was brutal and apparently deranged, and is one of the worst dictators in modern African history. During his regime, he granted himself all direct powers of governments and institutions. He ordered the death of entire families and villages. He executed members of his family. 1/3 of the population fled the country. He ordered every boat in the nation sold or destroyed and banned all citizens from the shoreline to prevent more people from escaping his terror. Macias Nguema was the son of a witch doctor. Nguema was the first president of Guinea. Though not as brutal as some of other dictators, he managed to do some of the weirdest crimes out there. Some of his crimes include stalking his mistress's former lovers. Other crimes he committed were intellectual murder by killing the intellectuals of his country. According to reports, more than 1/3 of Equatorial Guinea's population had to flee to other countries to escape his brutal reign. It was also reported that he ordered the execution of entire families and villages during the time of his reign. The country had neither a development plan nor proper accounting system for government funds. Macias Nguema trusted no one. He spent most of his time in his ancestral village of Mongomo, where he kept the national treasury right under his bed or in suitcases in his huts. But on the 18th of August in 1979, he met his end by his own nephew, who sentenced him to death. His nephew, Teodoro Obiang Nguema, is still in power to this day. Number 5 is Siad Barre of Somalia. Siad Barre of Somalia took power in a coup d'etat in 1969. He ruled Somalia for over 20 years before he was overthrown in 1991. He passed away in January 1995 on exile in Lagos, Nigeria. General Siad Barre's exit left Somalia without a central authority, and this resulted in a civil war that left the country without a leader for over 2 decades. General Siad Barre's regime, like many dictators in Africa, was marked by human rights abuses. The UN Development Program asserts the regime of Siad Barre had one of the worst human rights record in Africa. Siad Barre was a man who seized power and stayed in power from October 21, 1969 to January 26, 1991. He adopted socialism to the so-called needs of Somalia. His influences came from countries such as China and Russia. Though he attempted a lot of good, Barry committed a significant amount of human rights violations, such as jailing dissidents. Barry was also very well known for using his power to remove all opposition or people who he just didn't like. Barry died in political exile in 1995, but was returned to Somalia for burial in his home region. Number 4. Omar al-Bashir. Omar al-Bashir has been the leader of Sudan since 1989, when he took power in a military coup. Al-Bashir is one of the most brutal dictators in Africa, and despite ICC's warrant against him, he remains the president of Sudan. The International Criminal Court wants Omar al-Bashir for genocide, war crimes, murder, rape, torture, and other crimes against humanity for his crimes in Darfur. Al-Bashir is a more recent case of dictators. His biggest call to fame was in March 4, 2009, when he was issued an arrest warrant. Omar has been charged with 7 crimes against humanity. Omar planned to commit genocide against several ethnic groups such as the Masalit and Zagawa groups. Omar is regarded by many today as one of the worst dictators of Africa. Number 3. Hissène Habré of Chad. Hissène Habré seized power in 1982 from Goukouni Kouédéyi, who had just been elected president. He lost power to his former military commander, Idriss Déby, in December 1990. Habré fled to Senegal when Déby's Libya-backed insurgents marched into the capital in Jammeh. In May 2016, he was convicted of crimes against humanity. Hissène Habré's government carried out a frightening 40,000 politically motivated murders, and there are documented cases of at least 200,000 tortures in Habré's brutal 8-year rule of Niger. His rise to power was from Libya invading Chad. Habré and his troops defeated Libyan troops and sent them packing in November 1981. However, many human rights groups hold Habré responsible for killing thousands of people. These killings include massacres against Algeria and Zagawa. The Human Rights Watch charged him with authorizing the murders of tens of thousands of humans. Occupying the number 2 spot, Mobutu Sese Seko. Born Joseph Desire Mobutu on 14th October 1930, Sese Seko was a Congolese politician and military officer who was the president of Zaire. Mobutu, serving as chief of staff of the army and supported by Belgium and the United States, deposed the democratically elected government of nationalist Patrice Lumumba in 1960. Mobutu installed a government that arranged for Lumumba's execution in 1961 and continued to lead the country's armed forces until he took power directly in a second coup in 1965 to become the country's military dictator. To consolidate his power, he established the Popular Movement of the Revolution as the sole legal political party in 1967, changed the Congo's name to Zaire in 1971, and his own name to Mobutu Sese Seko in 1972. Mobutu claimed that his political ideology was neither left nor right, nor even center, but in practice he developed a totalitarian regime, amassed vast political wealth, and attempted to purge the country of all colonial cultural influence through his program of national authenticity. Mobutu consolidated power by publicly executing political rivals, secessionists, and coup plotters, and other threats to his rule. To set an example, many were hanged before large audiences. Such victims included former Prime Minister Evariste Kimba, who was tried in May 1966 and sent to the gallows on 30th May before an audience of 50,000 spectators. The men were executed on charges of being in contact with Colonel Alphonse Bangala and Major Pierre Mfobi for the purpose of planning a coup. Mobutu explained the executions as follows. One had to strike through a spectacular example and create the conditions of regime discipline. When a chief takes a decision, he decides, period. In 1968, Pierre Molele, Lumumba's Minister of Education and a rebel leader during the 1964 Simba Rebellion, was lured out of exile in Brazzaville on the belief that he would receive amnesty. Instead, he was tortured and killed by Mobutu's forces. While Molele was still alive, his eyes were gouged out, his genitals were ripped off, and his limbs were amputated one by one. Mobutu later gave up torture and murder and switched to a new tactic: buying off political rivals. He used the slogan, "Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer still," to describe his tactic of co-opting political opponents through bribery. A favorite Mobutu tactic was to play musical chairs, rotating members of his government, switching the cabinet rosters constantly to ensure that no one would pose a threat to his rule. Another tactic was to arrest and sometimes torture dissident members of the government, only to later pardon them and reward them with high office. In 1972, Mobutu tried unsuccessfully to have himself named president for life. In 1997, he was forced into exile. On the same day Mobutu fled into exile, Laurent Desire Kabila became the new president of Congo. From 23rd May 1997, Mobutu lived mostly in Rabat, Morocco. He died there on 7th September 1997 from prostate cancer. He is buried in an above-ground mausoleum in the Christian cemetery known as Cemetery European in Morocco. And the greatest of all, our number one, is Idi Amin Dada of Uganda. Idi Amin seized power in the military coup of 1971, sacking Milton Obote. Idi Amin fled Uganda in the heat of the Uganda-Tanzania War and went into exile in Libya and then Saudi Arabia, where he lived until his death on 16 August 2003. Amin's rule was characterized by rumors of cannibalism, frightening human rights abuses, political repression, several extrajudicial killings, corruption, and gross economic mismanagement. International observers and human rights groups estimate the death toll of his regime to be around 500,000. Ever seen that 1981 movie titled Rise and Fall of Idi Amin? Or 1976 raid on Entebbe? Kind of brings back some old memories. What about Last King of Scotland 2006 that earned Forest Whitaker Academy Awards Best Actor? These movies are based on the events of brutal Ugandan dictator Idi Amin. Idi Amin is someone that doesn't need too much introduction. He is one of the worst dictators of the last 20th century, also known as the Butcher of Uganda. This 6 feet 4 inches tall Ugandan boxing champion made the highest rank possible for a black African serving in the British Army. This man committed some unbelievable brutality that only modern-day Mexican drug cartels would touch. It is believed that at least 300,000 people were killed during his regime. He was born sometime in the mid-1920s in Koboko, Uganda, and died in August 18, 2003. This butcher left his mark on the world by using his infamous killer squads to murder his opponents and their families. He showed no mercy to anyone. The scariest thing about Amin was his ability to change from a gentleman to an incredibly angry person with no provocation. Amin is someone that has been described as erratic, unpredictable, and outspoken after the United Kingdom broke off all diplomatic relations with his regime in 1977. Amin declared that he had defeated Britain and conferred on himself this full title: His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Alhaji Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and the fishes of the seas, and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general and Uganda in particular. Amin's 8-year regime was characterized by serious human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings, torture, ethnic persecution, political repression, and corruption. Bodies were often dumped into River Nile to be washed away, and most of these victims were supporters of exiled President Obote and members of Akoli and Lango ethnic groups. Amin was deposed by Obote forces with the help of the Tanzanian forces in 1978 after he attempted to annex the Kagera region in Tanzania. He fled to Libya in 1979 and later relocated to Saudi Arabia, where he settled until his death in July 2003. Idi Amin was a polygamist with at least five wives and 43 children.